This episode, I'm joined by writer Victor Koman to discuss the life and work of Samuel Edward Konkin III, alongside discussions on agorism, libertarianism, and freedom. I'd like to say a big thank you to all my paying patrons and subscribers for making all of this work possible, and if you'd like to support the podcast, gain access to some exclusive content, or just keep everything running as the podcast runs off donations alone, then please find links in the description below. Otherwise, please enjoy. So, Victor Koman, thanks very much for joining us on Hermitix podcast. We are going to be discussing the work of Samuel Edward Konkin III, or SEK3, or SEK3 as he's also known, who, for people who don't know who he is, as we were discussing just before we started recording, he is he's a libertarian theorist. He's a disciple of Rothbard and Mises and a few others, but actually the others who he's a disciple of are probably just as obscure as Rothbard, as Konkin is himself. And really Konkin is mostly known for agorism, or agorism, as two pronunciations there, and
he preferred agorism, accent on the gore.
Yeah, agora. So Victor, just tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know you have you've sort of ended up as this Konkin archivist and the primary Konkin figure, I guess, in the world, but you also have your own science fiction career. So just tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and how you came to be, I guess, in this position as the lead Konkin person of the world.
Well, I started out I'm a California native, so I grew up in Mountain View and Los Gatos, California, which now are Silicon Valley. So I should have stuck around and made a living there, but I didn't. I moved to Los Angeles when I was 19, and have stayed in Southern California area ever since. As you might expect for a baby boomer, I was into space exploration and NASA, even as a 5-year-old. My parents said that my first word other than mommy and daddy was Sputnik. So that'll give you an idea of how far back it goes. So naturally, I was drawn to science fiction. And, in my pre-teen years, I read Heinlein and then moved on to Edward E. Smith, Doc Smith, the Skylark and the Lensman novels. A lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs in my mid-teens, and Robert E. Howard, stuff like that. Arthur Clarke, Ray Bradbury, all those. My parents were Russian. They both escaped from communism as children. So they basically grew up as very pro-American, very anti-communist. So that was the background in which I was drawn to Buckley conservatism, sort of, although I never really got involved in any politics. I first heard the term libertarian applied to Robert A. Heinlein, and so I started looking into that. I wondered what it was. I remembered Mad Magazine influenced me a lot as a kid. So I remember one line in there was that Ronald Reagan is Ayn Rand in drag. And so I thought, okay, who's this Ayn Rand? And so I think I read Rand later after I'd met Sam. So let's get to meeting Sam. When I attended San Jose State in 1973 and 74, their bookstore sold copies of a science fiction magazine called Alien Critic by Richard E. Geis. And he wrote these really great reviews, very insightful and at the same time very funny and sometimes sarcastic reviews of things. And in it was, in one of the early issues was an ad for New Libertarian Notes and J. Neil Schulman's 6-part interview with Heinlein. So I wrote to them and ordered as many issues as I could get. There were 6 issues, and I think I got 4 of them. The others are sold out. But Neil eventually sent me Xeroxes of the rest. And I read the interview, And that sort of cemented my libertarianism when it was explained to me through the interview what it was all about. I started corresponding with Sam after that. The letters, I kept carbons of the letters, and they're now in the archives, which will be made public at some point when I get everything done. And so in June of 1974, I drove down to the Santa Barbara Writers Conference because the class that I had in fiction writing at San Jose State was taught by the host of the Santa Barbara Writers Conference. And there I got to meet Ray Bradbury, an idol of mine, and we became friends after that, or lifelong acquaintances, however you'd want to call it. He knew who I was, and he endorsed the Jehovah Contract when I wrote that, and Kings of the High Frontier. So I just drove on from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles and started living there. And a year later, in the summer of '75, Sam and Neil and a couple other friends drove out to L.A., and I met them. And they moved into the Anarcho Village in Long Beach. And eventually, about a year later, I moved there too. So we had this sort of concentration of libertarian activists and writers, and churned out 101 issues of New Libertarian Weekly, and had a great time doing it. Mm-hmm. So that's basically how we got together, and the movement grew from there.
Mm-hmm. So what was, I guess it's the immediate cliche question, but what was Konkin like as a person?
He was great fun. I mean, he enjoyed science fiction conventions. He enjoyed beer. He smoked a pipe. He didn't do drugs all that much. But, was like socially smoked pot now and then, but not to excess. I think he preferred holding on to his rationality. Beer was his preferred beverage, and great sense of humor. A million ideas an hour. If you could slow him down. I mean, he inspired a couple of my novels just by casual, offhanded throwaway lines. Like one time he was wondering why the Catholic Church didn't just, hang out at abortion factories and pick up the fetuses and raise them themselves. Well, of course, abortion is a rather brutal slicing up, so you don't get much left. But it inspired me to think, what if you could save the fetus and implant it in somebody who wanted to have the baby? And that was the genesis of Solomon's Knife, my novel about a doctor who does just that and gets caught at it.
I see. So, I mean, just to draw on your own history there, just before we jump into the Hermitix question, I'm interested. I guess for you, some people come to libertarianism after going through tons of other movements, and they, it's the political position where you sort of many libertarians have this understanding of that there is no perfect solution, but this is the one which really would work the best. I mean, this is what David Friedman says. But it seems for you that coming from that, with the communist history, that there's always been that element of liberty, right? So a deeper on the foundation of, does libertarianism and the belief in capitalism begin really from an understanding of the atrocities of communism for you?
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, my parents, told me stories about what they had to. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a black hussar, so he was like a personal guardian to the Tsarina, and at least that's what she says. I haven't been able to track down my genealogy, any farther back than just their names, but I'm working on it. I mean, I have a picture of him, a photograph of him in uniform, so it looked pretty Black Hussarish. So I'm going to assume that she wasn't lying to me. And they escaped to, my mother escaped to Harbin. My father was born in Harbin to his parents who escaped from Russia. So actually, I think my father escaped with his father, and his father left his mom behind. So I don't know the whole story there, but so they did not have anything fond to say about the Soviet Union.
Did I mispronounce your name at the start then?
No, Koman.
Oh, okay. Okay, I wanted to, know, if there was a...
It's an abbreviation. It's my grandfather changed it when they came over to the U.S. It was Kompantsev, and he just shortened it to Koman.
I see. Well, with much of this foundation, I guess now this foundation laid, I'll ask you the Hermitix question just to sort of throw and get all these ideas whirring in the sense that perhaps Konkin would have done with these 1,000 ideas a minute. You can place 3 thinkers, living or dead, into a room and listen in on the conversation. Who do you pick? But Samuel Edward Konkin III is sat there already waiting for these 3 to enter.
Well, Neil Schulman, another anarcho-village inhabitant and writer, and inspired by Sam, was fascinated that what he considered the 3 most interesting people died on November 22nd, 1963. John F. Kennedy, C.S. Lewis, and Aldous Huxley, within a few hours of each other. He contemplated writing a play with the 3 of them, but I don't know if he ever did. In any case, someone named Peter Kreeft wrote a book called Between Heaven and Hell, which was a dialogue or a trialogue among the 3. And I guess that would have been an interesting group. I might pick Karl Marx, Ludwig von Mises, and Adam Smith to discuss with Sam the labor theory of value versus the subjective theory, the theory of subjective value, free markets such as agorism versus government control of the economy. And most interestingly, how liberty might actually achieve the goals of socialism better and less bloodily than communism. Maybe set Karl Marx's head straight.
So I'm going to assume that both you and Sam are 100% sympathetic with Mises, with the subjective theory of value, or is there some alterations?
Well, I think if Sam probably would not have created agorism if he agreed with Mises 100%. And even with Rothbard, even though Rothbard's book For a New Liberty was a great inspiration to Sam, that was 1973. But he had been, I believe, with Rothbard's circle in 1971 when he started attending NYU. So. And if he agreed 100% with Rothbard, he wouldn't have created new libertarianism and agorism and counter-economics. He felt that they laid a great groundwork, and he extended their theory logically and moralistically into agorism.
I guess one of the peculiar differences, I guess, between, you go back to that room with Adam Smith, Mises, and Marx, is that, between, let's say, let's just take Marx and Mises, is that the Mises side of things with Mises, Rothbard, Konkin, Hopper, Hayek, they differ from each other, but I think each would be supportive if one of their views, let's say, took root. They'd at least have many sympathies there. Whereas I always get the impression, especially among leftists and Marxists, that they're very quick to say, no, we're not Marxists, we're Leninists, we're Trotskyists, and they have the extreme divisiveness and power grabbing, right? So, I think there's always that key difference of, okay, well, I'm not strictly a Hoppian, but the foundation is something I at least agree with.
Mm-hmm.
I guess ultimately you have liberty in the free market as the foundation of most of these Mises adjacent thinkers.
Right. So the next question you gave me was, what's the difference between libertarianism and new libertarianism?
Yeah, I mean, so
right?
absolutely. And I guess just to throw in, because if people just search up Samuel Edward Konkin, the two books that you're going to see, or the two major publications by your own publishing company, CoPubCo,
yes,
is the New Libertarian Manifesto, which was then reeditioned as the 25th anniversary edition, and an agorist primer, Counter-Economics, Total Freedom, and You. So, there's quite a few libertarian manifestos floating around, but people are going to focus on this title of New Libertarian Manifesto. So that was where the question came from. What's the difference between libertarianism and New Libertarianism?
Well, it sort of stems from the title of his magazine when he attended NYU. People pronounce that new. So it was NYU, and then in parentheses, New Libertarian Notes. And by the fifth issue, he dropped the NYU part, and it was just New Libertarian Notes. It was a takeoff on the weekly SDS newsletter, New Left Notes. So he thought that was a good sort of connection between the two. So, people who are familiar with New Left Notes would look at it and go, oh, New Libertarian Notes, what's that? In preparation for this, I went back and looked at that first issue of New Libertarian Notes, and the difference I think that he meant was that New Libertarianism was more action-oriented. The very first issue attacked the apathy of libertarians up to that point, who felt that you've let somebody else take us to liberty. We'll write articles and hope that somebody else gets around to freeing us. We'll wait for this. Here's the rather florid statement, because Sam was 25 at the time when he wrote this. What is the NYULA? The new NYU Libertarian Alliance. Like all groups using the name Libertarian Alliance, NYULA is precisely that, an alliance of libertarians. Just as an association of states, each retaining its sovereignty and independence while working in concert with others, calls itself an alliance, so do we, who recognize the sovereignty only of individual humanity with uncompromised freedom and full responsibility for only one's own acts, cleanse this label and valiantly flaunt it at those who cannot imagine free men coming together without losing their freedom. So from the very start, he was basically trying to reclaim various terms such as alliance and libertarianism and so on, and apply it to a more active activist role. It's really quite remarkable looking at those 8 pages of basically just typewritten text on legal-sized paper folded in half. He sets up the groundwork for nearly everything he'll do for the remaining third of a century of his life. He demonstrates his knowledge of radical history by noting that the phrase withering away of the state was used by Karl Marx to split the Bakuninists at the First International in order for Marx to retain his power. Sam attacked apathy as the true enemy within current libertarianism, again, 1971, and instead urging each individual to take action in his own liberation. He introduces Dana Rohrabacher to the world by publishing the lyrics of his song Individual Man. He urged libertarians to mimic the burgeoning gay liberation movement and, quote, come out of your, parenthesis, ethical, close parenthesis, closets. He published a full page of libertarian advertising called The Black Market, creating a sort of a proto-agora. He defined libertarianism in 3 paragraphs, demonstrating an inclusiveness that anticipates the movement of the libertarian left, which he later started, embracing everything from free markets to communitarian anarchy, and even anticipating counter-economics and agorism by excluding from his definition of the black market, things like murder incorporated, or any activity that violates one's life directly by murder or assault, or indirectly by theft or extortion, unquote. But he explicitly states that the sale of drugs, smuggled goods, pornography, and untaxed, untariff items are indeed considered legitimate by libertarians. And he introduces libertarians to, he introduces libertarians to a libertarian analysis of science fiction with Richard Friedman's first column reviewing Heinlein's Have Spacesuit Will Travel. And from there, he and Richard Friedman sort of co-produced many issues of New Libertarian Notes with an insert of Richard Friedman's Renaissance magazine, which was a science fiction critique magazine. Embedded within New Libertarian Notes. So from the very start, he was trying to merge science fiction fandom with libertarianism. And he often joked that when he started New Libertarian Notes, he saw that there were a lot of libertarians. He saw that there were a lot of science fiction fans. He figured he would get both libertarians and science fiction fans to buy his magazine and read it. And what he actually got was only science fiction fans who were libertarians already. So that actually limited his reach rather than expanding it. But he still wound up being very influential.
One thing I just, in relation to this emphasis on action and something you brought in with the biography, which I'm not too familiar with. So you said that Sam was living in a sort of an anarcho dwelling?
Yeah, a narco village. It was basically a rundown apartment, about 12 units. It was built in the 1920s, I think, and survived the 1930 earthquake that devastated most of Long Beach. So it was already kind of creaky when we moved in. He moved in. Neil Schulman moved into an apartment. Two of his other friends, Charles Curley, who was instrumental in legalizing gold in the mid-1970s, and Andy Thornton and Bob Cohen. They all moved into the anarcho village and lived there. Chris Schaefer, the manager, was a libertarian, a friend of Dana Rohrabacher's, and so I moved in eventually, and then a slew of other people came and went, and it was very convenient because turning out New Libertarian Weekly from 1975 to 1977, we were able to meet every Tuesday in Sam's apartment, and we would the pages would have been printed. We would collate and fold them and stuff them in envelopes and put on postage and mail them out, and it was a great way to get together and build this camaraderie, build this agora of ours. And the name Anarcho Village grew out of when he lived in New York City. He lived in a even more rundown apartment, which he called the Anarcho Slum. And so for him, this was a step upward into a sort of a less rundown apartment building. So, he lived basically as poor as a church mouse, but everything he had, he devoted to the movement.
Wow. So I guess it's the key question then, what exactly is an agora?
Well, it's tied in with counter-economics. Counter-economics is sort of the basis by which, the means by which to achieve the agora. Again, I'll quote from his own writing from an agorist primer. He said, to understand agorism fully and to compare it to competing ways of thinking, one needs to know two things about it: its goal and its path to that goal. This knowledge is critical to evaluating all ideologies. The goal is living in the agora, and the path is expanding counter-economics. Remember our constant, if not nagging, emphasis on consistency, both internally and with reality. Agorism must have a path consistent with its goal and a goal consistent with its path. So agorism, like all philosophies, begin with a set of axioms, and he lays them out. The 0th axiom is there's no contradiction in reality and theory. There are no contradictions in reality, and theory must be consistent with reality. Commonly known axioms in philosophy are existence exists and A is A. Well-known mathematical axioms are things equal to another thing are equal to each other, and a statement leading to a contradiction with a theorem or axiom is false. Since his grounding was in theoretical chemistry, he was well based in the notion of axioms and mathematical ways of expressing reality. So that's the basis that he's working from. If it doesn't seem consistent with reality, then it's probably not a realistic philosophy. So he had 4 other axioms. The first is that the closest approach to a free society is an uncorrupted agora, the open marketplace. The second axiom of agorism is the agora self-corrects for small perturbations of corruption, which simply means that the free market entities will defend the free market. They have an interest in defending the free market, just like statists have an interest in defending the state. The third axiom of agorism is that the moral system of any agora is compatible with pure libertarianism. This axiom means that life and property are safe from all those who act morally in this society. And the fourth axiom is agora in part is agora in whole. To a workable approximation, the corruption of an agora raises production costs and risks. So small corruptions, raise the costs in a small way. Big corruptions raise, and the first axiom is that the second axiom is that it'll self-correct. So he felt that agorism was a moral way of enacting libertarianism. So
I guess maybe the question, not necessarily to critique it or pick at it, but where exactly is this objective morality founded, which everyone in the agora is agreed upon?
Well, again, he goes back to your philosophy has to be consistent with reality. So if you don't assume that reality is real, then it's very difficult to form a philosophy of dealing with reality. And dealing with reality should be the goal of any philosophy. So to him, it's objectively true that if you take somebody's property away from them, you've done something wrong. And if you don't do that, then you're behaving morally. He believed in the non-aggression principle, which I think you asked that later on. The foundation. Got to mention counter-economics. Basically, counter-economics is anything that is not approved of by the state, but is at the same time moral to do. As I mentioned earlier, no murder for hire. He differentiated between the black market and the red market. The black market is non-coercive things like gambling, prostitution, pornography, not paying your taxes, smuggling, contraband, stuff like that. Red market would be murder for hire, shakedowns, basically mafia type stuff. To him, the mafia was just a competitor with the state. Mm-hmm. So he coined the term counter-economics, again, to sort of honor the counterculture that was big in the 60s. So he said, if the hippies can have a counterculture, which is a culture outside of the accepted culture, then counter-economics is economics that occurs outside of the government officially approved economy, the white market. So you had white market, black market, and red market. And so only the black market was consistently counter-economic. Mm-hmm. And that's where he got that from. And so he did understand, obviously, the difference between a coercive or a voluntary exchange. And to him, anything that the state engaged in was coercive, and anything that was non-coercive and not approved by the state was counter-economics. So this was his definition of the goal of agorism. The goal of agorism is the agora, the society of the open marketplace, as near to untainted by theft, assault, and fraud as can be humanly attained, is as close to a free society as can be achieved. He didn't think that a quote-unquote free society, totally free society, could exist because of human nature. Mm. So the perturbations of the agora that he foresaw would be, people resorting to theft or, stuff like that. And he wanted to create a moral system that allowed people to, or encouraged people to denounce and prevent that kind of activity, while encouraging all others. A free society is the only one in which each and every one of us can satisfy his or her subjective values without crushing others' values by violence and coercion. So he defined counter-economics as anything non-coercive that is nonetheless forbidden, regulated, or taxed by the state. He believed in the non-aggression principle, and in the right to property and to personal autonomy, which are, the usual libertarian positions. But he utterly opposed any inconsistent path toward a libertarian society. In other words, a path that itself was not libertarian. The means justify the ends. He was opposed to the Libertarian Party and other political strategies because the path was not consistent with the goal.
I am wondering, did he have any sympathies for any aspect of the state at all?
No. He may have at an early age, he may have. When he was living in Canada, he was a member of the Social Credit Party, which was sort of a conservative party, and I've never really studied it, so I don't know how much it has to do with the sort of social credit ideas of, let's say, communist China, where you accumulate social credits by doing things the state approves of. I don't think that was what they meant by social credit. But when he came to the U.S., he and the Libertarian Party was forming, he did join the Libertarian Party's radical caucus in an effort to pull people away from engaging in using the party to pursue power. And he gave up on that fairly quickly, and then just tried to pull people out of the party as best he could, and would, whenever somebody left the party and would write a scathing letter about the party, he would publish it in New Libertarian Notes.
So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and then he would welcome them with open arms.
So agorism could never really be said to be a revolution in any political sense. It has to happen organically in relation to counter-economics in this slow, or maybe might not necessarily be slow, but this build-up of the utilization of black markets and counter-economics as an organic collective / individual push against statist authority.
Right, but he did believe in revolution. In fact, that's one of the chapters in New Libertarian Manifesto. Mm-hmm. But the revolution doesn't come from our side. You can't cause a revolution. Revolutions only occur when the state strikes back, when the state feels so threatened that it begins to lash out like a dying animal thrashing about. That is the point of revolution. So he was very much against any form of what we would consider revolutionary activity, sabotage or planting bombs or any of that. He wanted people to live their own lives as freely as possible. And simply by doing that, and doing it with full awareness of what they're doing, and without feeling any guilt for what they're doing, that they would create the agora, and the state would collapse because it would keep losing adherents and people who actually believe in the state or are in fear of it or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it's always the cliche question with libertarianism, I guess, is how with agorism, in this new agorist society, someone comes along and they start talking about a collective state that they want to build. How does that stop?
Well, because agorism is morally aware libertarianism. The people involved would understanding counter economics is an important part of it. They would understand the nature of the state and would reject it, just the way the Amish reject a lot of the rules of the state. But this could be on a totally different technological level than buggies, horse buggies and stuff. But Sam had a complicated relationship with psychology. He hated psychobabble and people that use psychology to, serve the state or oppress people. But he had an insight that an individual's resistance to behaving counter-economically was mostly psychological. So much of both New Libertarian Manifesto and an Agorist Primer were devoted to using statistics to reveal how little success the state actually has in enforcing its millions of laws. You've heard the idea of, you break 3 laws just waking up in the morning. Well, did you get arrested for those? Most obedience to the state results from a few high-profile enforcement actions, such as brutal crackdown on all the January 6th people, and ignoring all the people that got away with the summer of 2020 riots. Mm-hmm. So once you free yourself from that fear that the state's about to catch you, you become more inured to the notion that that the state is out to get you. You become more accepting of the notion that you can live freely. And then the next step in counter-economics is to expand that circle of freedom by tactfully advocating for agorism and pointing out to people, hey, what we're doing, the state, when we, trade each other without registering or paying taxes on what we're doing, or slipping money under the table, or running a speakeasy, or I guess now it would be a vape easy, or now even a free speech easy, I guess, that you sort of take digs at the state and encourage people not to feel like they're doing something wrong. Because a lot of what Sam would call counter-economists, what we would call black marketeers, do have feelings of guilt that they're doing something wrong, and they have this urge to go legit and join regular society. And he was trying to explain to them that no, this is the society. What you're joining is joining the white market, joining the acceptable above ground economy is actually doing something wrong, doing something bad. So he wanted to invert that psychology that the state has been using for 10,000 years to keep us oppressed.
So where did he think the general collective agreement that the state is, the fact that people even agree to it altogether, was that for him just this ongoing propaganda, or was there some other reasons that he saw?
No, I think he thinks that the state is the most successful propaganda machine, and he wanted to try to counteract that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So perhaps it's I guess because he focuses on practicality. How did he? I mean, we've touched on it a lot, I guess, already. But how, to give an image of an agorist society, what that would look like? I mean, in a nutshell, how did he envision that?
Well, as he says in one of his books, I'm not sure if it's the Manifesto or the Primer, that science fiction. There are a lot of novels of science fiction that give us a good view of what a future free society would be like. And in my novels, I sort of try to figure out how we get there from here. But other novels take place in these already achievable free societies. But of course, for drama, they have to have threats to the free society, and so. He figured it would look very much like contemporary society without taxes, without regulation, without oppression, without jails and wars and so on.
It all seems so simple.
Well, it is. It's as simple as the state is simple. There's nothing complex about government. It's, brutalize people until they give you stuff. And his alternative was free yourself until you get to keep your stuff and your life and your choices.
Mm-hmm. Did he, I'm imagining the answer is no, but did he ever sort of become pessimistic about the fact that the things weren't necessarily changing en masse in relation, we're still in the status world, so to speak?
We never really, he was neither a starry-eyed optimist nor a down-in-the-mouth pessimist. He figured if he could just keep reaching people, that it would grow from person to person. So he never really supported these, create a new country. He called it anarcho-Zionism, where let's get all the libertarians together and go create our own little country somewhere on the ocean or in New Hampshire or something like that. He thought that you could embed an agorist society within a statist society and just have it grow like, mold in a Petri dish until it just pushes away all of the state and, leaves them without any followers.
Okay. So what sort of, the history you've touched on the early history of agorism in this sort of anarcho apartment that you're in, and then it grew, I guess, from the new libertarian papers and the archives, everything you've archived, which is an astounding amount of material. Where does agorism sort of stand today, and what was its legacy? I mean, one of the most famous, the more famous articles written about it is by Rothbard. Rothbard, it's weird because practically everybody I'm talking about is dead now. Neil Schulman, Sam, Murray, another writer influenced by Sam was Brad Lineweaver.
He's dead. Bill Patterson, who wrote the Heinlein biography and was a friend and hung out with us whenever he was in town, he's gone. So it's kind of hard to talk about that generation as impacting the current generation. But if you just search on the word agorism, you'll find all sorts of references to all sorts of groups and individuals and movements, if you want to call it that. Some of them are, pure Konkinians, and others, are taking their own interpretation of it. But he believed that anything that sticks with the fundamental of non-coercion and adherence to reality would be an acceptable variant. So I see a lot of I have a lot of contacts on Twitter that are posting about agorism, and they're out there on Instagram and so on. So the idea is spreading. The manifesto's a consistent seller, not a super huge bestseller, but it's moving along there. Even without my advertising it, it's the company that prints it, Lightning Source, has deals with Amazon or whatever, and whenever it sells on Amazon, they print it and send it out. I don't have anything to do with that, but the sales show that there is a consistent international sales of the books. And when I can get his videos together, in the mid-1980s, he formed the Agorist Institute and gave lectures, and other people gave lectures, and he gave classes in counter-economics and agorism, and I videotaped them and audio taped some of them, but most of them are videotaped. So those will be coming out as soon as I can get. They've already been converted into digital form, and they just have to be cleaned up. The audio has to be boosted because I had a terrible microphone on these mid-1980s, early 1990s VHS recording cameras. So there's that. And I think the influence is there and probably just growing slowly, like a lot of movements. It'll grow slowly until it grows rapidly. But I don't think it's going to die out. It's inevitably part of libertarianism. It's part of the American tradition of liberty, and certainly the whole European Western culture.
And where would you advise someone to begin with? Agorism and then agorism, and Konkin in general?
I think because he wrote it intentionally simple, an agorist primer would be the best, because there he covers both counter-economics and libertarianism, and takes you step by step from how the state began and how you can move to an agorist condition, a state of statelessness. And then for a little more technicality, but certainly a lot more rousing revolutionary fervor, would be New Libertarian Manifesto. And he wrote part of a book that was supposed to be a full-length popular treatment of counter-economics, called Counter-Economics. He wrote 6 chapters that I know of. Allegedly, he wrote 4 more. So that would be 10 chapters of an 18-chapter book. The other 18 chapters were supposed to have been written by Neil Schulman, and they were going to alternate between Neil would write about counter economics and how it's treated in the popular entertainment world, novels, films, and he would give counter economic interpretations of films and so on each of the subjects that Sam was writing more technical economic arguments about. But now that he's dead, I can say this. Neil never got around to writing anything for it. So those 10 chapters that Sam wrote are all that exist. Now, I was able to find 6 of them because I had the typewritten manuscript that he gave me to do something with eventually. He intended to, he took it to general publishers when it was still a portion and outline. And it was roundly rejected by, as you might suspect, by the very non-libertarian publishers out there. So I do have an email from him to someone about turning it into HTML and putting it on the web. So that's why, with Neil's advice, I took the 6 chapters that I had and made a 99-cent ebook and put it on Amazon and elsewhere. You can link to it from KoPubCo. So there are those 6 chapters. If I can ever find the other 4 chapters, I'll bring it back out as a 10-chapter book and possibly update it. Neil was against my updating it, so I didn't. But I do have the updates that I had done up to that point, and will incorporate them in at some point if I can find those other 4 chapters. And then it'll be sort of a book.
And that's at kopubco.com, and then I believe it's agorism.kopubco.com.
No, there's archives.kopubco.com, but the books are just kopubco.com will get you there. And I'm updating the website. The website, when you go to it, everyone, it looks awful because it was made in 2005 and hasn't been updated much since. I am currently on the verge of releasing newly updated mobile device-friendly website using W3C school CSS cascading style sheet code, which will now make it look a lot better. So look forward to that.
Okay. It all sounds very good.
Sometime in the next month. Yeah.
I mean, is there anything you'd like to add about Sam or agorism that we haven't touched on?
We didn't touch on his. We touched on his interest in science fiction. Yeah, as I said, I was interested in Heinlein and Doc Smith, and I even read Tolkien, but later in my time. But he was interested in Tolkien and G.K. Chesterton, Charles Williams, and C.S. Lewis, all the Inklings. He was especially fond of C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. I don't know his opinion of Narnia Chronicles. I think he liked them, but they weren't as important to him as the science fiction. So this led him to, at an early point in his life, like 1972 or so, joined the C.S. Lewis Society in New York. And when he came out to California, he joined the C.S. Lewis Society here, became good friends with some of the people there. He took notes at their meetings and wrote them up for their newsletter, and he wound up typesetting the newsletter. So he considered himself an atheist, but he liked C.S. Lewis's concepts of God, I think. I think he liked the Christian libertarians' fervor and faith that I think their faith in God matched his faith in the market. So he hung out well with them.
Okay. You think that's sort of like a strange key, not necessarily a key element, but an element that, to focus on, to see that agorism, it expands in different ways. So Sam's thought expands.
Well, I think Christian morality, as he read it in C.S. Lewis, probably colored his notion of agorist morality. In other words, there is an absolute morality. There is an appeal to consistency. That was his biggest point, was the ends and means have to coincide, and they can't violate each other for the sake of convenience or getting there faster, or we'll just violate our ethics right now in order to get enough power so that we can not have to violate our ethics anymore. He felt that was the road to hell, metaphorically speaking.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing you often hear about Samuel Edward Konkin III is that, and I've heard this from many libertarians, is that he's the most consistent libertarian in that regard. And he's the most consistent libertarian is sort of a phrase I've heard thrown around.
Well, he would be proud to hear that.
Well, then, I think that's a good place to finish up.
All right.
Yeah, Victor Koman, thanks very much.
Well, thank you, James.